Jeff, you mentioned Carl Betts a minute ago. Can you tell me a little bit about him and about the two children on the show?
Carl was just a pleasure to work with and pleasure to direct. And again, disciplined, prepared, delivering on all levels. Lovely man. Died much too soon, too early. And the Paul Peterson, the boy, wonderful kid, and Shelley Fabre, most talented, luminous young lady you can imagine. It was a pleasure to work with those kids. They were so good. And somehow this family, Donna had several children of her own at home, and she was so gracious and wonderfully involved with them, but always to a certain point, which made it very nice. You know, she never got too personally close, but close enough to make the family a family unit. You know, there was just a wonderful coming together of those four people, which is what kept the show on all those years, I think. And Paul West was the producer-writer, was so tuned in to them and they to him that it was just a good experience.
Can you describe the shooting schedule on the Donna Reed show?
It was basically the same as most of those filmed comedies. We would meet on, let's say, Monday, to pick a day, read the script, have some notes. I'd have some suggestions. Donna might have some suggestions. Then we get right into the studio at Screen Gems and get on our feet and block the show. Monday afternoon, Tuesday, and then we would shoot Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And it just always worked. You know, it was always, we did very little overtime, very little late hours, and it was just a very comfortable, good schedule. Donna liked to get home to her kids. We all liked to get home for dinner, and so it worked out very well.
Was that typical in television for you to have those 2 days of rehearsal?
Yeah, Andy Griffith was the same. We'd come in, we'd read around the table, get on the stage, rehearse for a day and a half, or a little more perhaps, and then shoot for 3 days with the single camera.
A lot of the comedies you made in the 60s involved children. Can you tell me how you worked with child actors?
Same way I worked with the other actors, except I think in many instances the kids were easier. You know, children are very responsive. They want to please, and they have a certain level of enthusiasm that if you capture it is, you know, wonderful. And so I always enjoyed the shows with the kids, always.
You mentioned the Andy Griffith show. How did you get involved? How did you come onto that show?
They called me. They had a wonderful director for the first couple of seasons, whose name escapes me, but he was so talented. And I used to watch the show and thought it was so well done. And then finally, a call came in. That director, whose name I can't remember, went to Disney.
Was that Bob Sweeney?
It was exactly Bob Sweeney. Thank you, Steve. Bob Sweeney went over to Disney. Was I available? Yes. And so I did one season for Andy Griffith, and then and loved it. I mean, it was wonderful, and it was kind of funny because Andy and I were in college together, and we were in a show together, a musical, as a matter of fact, in the chorus, singing together. And we used to rehearse out in the woods, he and I and Bob Armstrong. And so 15 years, at least maybe 20 years went by, and the next thing you know, I'm walking onto the set of the Andy Griffith show, and he looked at me and I looked at him, and it was like, how do you describe it? It was like time stood still. Here we were again, you know, all these years later, working together. So it was fun. It was good.
How much input did Andy Griffith have into the content of that show?
He had quite a bit. But again, the best writers in television worked on that show. Aaron Rubin was the producer, writer, wonderful writer, and again, he hired just the creme de la creme writers. And we would sit around the table, and Don Knotts would have his ideas, and Andy would have his ideas, and they would bounce off one another. and Aaron Rubin was always right there, writing and contributing with the writers. You see, we always had not just Aaron, the producer-writer, but the writers of that script. And it wasn't, 10 writers on that one script as they have today in the sitcoms. Today there are 10, 15, 20 writers in the making of a sitcom. Then it was one writer, or perhaps a team of two people, two writers who wrote that script, and they would be there for that first reading, and we would make our notes, and they would make their notes, and we'd come in the next day, and here was, a script with changes, and then get on the set, block it, and shoot it for 3 days.
Was that typical for the cast and the writers and the director to interact on a sitcom?
Yes, in that period, it was what we did. That's how we did it.
Just want to ask you about a few of the other cast members. Well, you mentioned Don Knotts. What do you remember about him?
Oh, funniest man, sweetest man, talented, just extraordinary. As Andy, extraordinarily talented fellow. And everybody, Aunt May, she was, wonderful, and Ron Howard, wonderful kid. Just a very responsive, smart, sweet young boy with his wonderful parents who would be on the set. It was a love-in. Every show was a love-in, literally.
And Jim Nabors as Gomer was pretty heavy in your season.
I think I introduced him the season I was there. And again, he just fit right in. He was just immediately one of the gang. And so wonderful to work with such talented people.
Do you have any memories of favorite episodes or favorite bits or scenes from the Andy Griffith Show?
I'll answer that in the following way. Many years later, 10, 15 years later, I was in another building, and the receptionist, my office in that building, was down the hall, and when we had to mail letters or pick up our mail, we had to go to the reception area. So one day I came into the reception area to get my mail, and the receptionist was sitting there watching the TV screen, and it was an Andy Griffith episode. And I thought, well, I'm going to see this show. It looks pretty cute. So I watched 15 minutes of that show, at least, till the end of the show, laughing as she was laughing, and I laughed. It was a wonderful show, very funny show. At the end of the show, up came the credits, directed by Jeffrey Hayden. I had just forgotten then I thought, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember developing this little thing with Don Knotts and Andy and so. But while I was watching the show, I had no recollection. Were there favorite shows? Yes. Andy used to do a routine in college on Shakespeare. He would be playing a character or reading from Shakespeare. And we did one show about that. And I remember it was hard to get through the show, not just for me, but for them and for everybody else on the set. They were just he was so funny and so delicious, in that sketch. So I remember that. And there were other episodes, if I think hard enough, I can, think back to. And how sometimes they would get a little piece of business on the set, and between those two guys, they would just develop it a little further, and we would just go on and shoot it, and it would turn out to be just magical.
Andy Griffith and Don Knotts.
Yes.
Or
Gomer, too. He too would fit right in.
Were you able to get in there, too, and help develop those comedy bits with them?
They didn't need me, frankly. They really didn't. All they needed from me was to cover it. Of course, I contributed, and they were very, very, we were all, in this thing together. And if I had any thoughts and suggested them, boom, they would take them and run with them. But I must say, it was the magic of Andy and Don that was very special.
I mean, were there things you had to do differently when you did comedy versus drama in terms of timing or?
No, I was never aware of that, no. I mean, I'm, always reaching for honesty you know, and a level of performance. Uh, and no, I don't shift gears, not really.
You directed another classic sitcom around the same time as the Andy Griffith Show, Leave It to Beaver. Was that as good an experience?
Almost. In all honesty, it was fun. You know, lovely show. Irv Paley was the producer, and again, a lovely man. And the people were nice on that show, and talented, but it was not quite the same for me as Donna Reed or Andy Griffith. It was a little more prescribed, you know. We got a script, and that was pretty much it. I mean, certainly anybody who had any ideas could change this, change that, no problem, because the writers were the two guys who wrote and produced were very, very talented writers. So there was not much improvisation. You know, what we got on the page, that's what we shot. So it wasn't, you know, quite as exciting for me as the other shows.
So on the Andy Griffith Show, some of what we see on screen was improvised.
Oh,
right?
yes, indeed. Oh, yes, yes. And that's, I think, what paid off for that series. Well, plus Aaron Rubin was a very special talent as a writer, and the selection of the stories and the nature of the stories on the Griffith Show were just wonderful.
Can you describe that quality of Rubin's writing that makes it special?
I can only say that here he was writing or bringing in writers who wrote for this rural sheriff, right in a southern rural town. But so many of the stories had everything to do with my life, with, you know, my family's life. I mean, they were just universal stories, and I think that was part of Aaron's talent, you know, that they would choose things that worked for a sheriff in a small southern town with with his assistant sheriff, as it were, and those other characters. But all of the stories always had seeds of something universal, something meaningful.
Going back to Leave It to Beaver for a second, do you remember anything about Jerry Mathers and Tony Dow, the two child actors?
You know, again, lovely young actors, very cooperative, very eager. Tony Dow was, you know, being a little older, was a little more, how shall I say, a little more flexible, perhaps. But there were, you know, everybody on that show was good. It's just that there was not that loose improvisational character to that series as there were to the others. But again, the stories were so good and the scripts were so good that all we had to do was kind of shoot them in terms of developing some real life on the stage.
Both of your episodes of Leave It to Beaver featured Ken Osmond as Eddie Haskell. Do you remember him?
I guess so.
Okay.
You know, it'd be hard to remember the specifics.
Why was 70s...
But Eddie Haskell then later became a producer, as I recall.
Ken Osmond did?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm thinking somebody else. Forgive me.
So 77 Sunset Strip, why was that important for you at this?
Because that, after several years of doing sitcoms, one after the other, one series to another, and working quite a bit in that world, I was known as a comedy director. And I really wanted to do dramatic shows. I mean, I'd come from the theater in college, New York, and my interest was in dramatic shows. I'd done many plays on the road and summer theater and so forth. And I wanted to get back to dramas, not sitcoms. And an opportunity presented itself that there was an opening at Warner's for 77 Sunset Strip. And I said, woo, can I, you know, it's a kind of comedy drama. I'd love to do that show. So I got an assignment to do a 77 Sunset Strip, and I stayed there for years because it was just the most wonderful time for me. It had a terrific cast, you know, starting with Zimbalist and the other actors on the, in that company. We would get the script. It would say on the front page, "You may not change one word of this script without calling the front office, under the penalty of death." Didn't say that, but it was written that clearly. You didn't dare change a word, okay? We would come in the morning, and we would shoot all morning based on the script. Then we would go to lunch in the commissary, the cast, the group, the essential cast. We would go to the commissary. We'd sit at a big round table reserved for us. We'd bring the scripts, bring our pencils, and we would sit there over lunch rewriting the rest of the day's work and not say anything to anybody. Just go ahead and shoot what we had. I mean, we stayed with the story and with the script basically, but Eddie Burns would have an idea. Ephraim, of course, would have an idea. There was a wonderful, short, funny comic guy whose name escapes me. He would have a lot of ideas, and we would mess around a little bit, and we'd go back and shoot it. The producers would see the dailies and say, "Wonderful, oh, terrific day's work," never catching up on us that we had changed a little here, changed a little there. So there was a lot of improvising done while I did that show, and I loved those actors, and we all got along so well. And the producer was a fellow named Joel Rogerson, one of the best producers I ever worked with in my career in television. The most wonderful writer, wonderful producer, wonderful guy in casting. He was just a lovely guy in every department. And he was most helpful on that show. And he made it a wonderful experience for all of us. So I think I was on that show again, maybe 2 or 3 seasons, which in turn led to other dramatic shows. And so that was one of the best experiences, most fun shows I ever did.
Another show you did at that time was the Lloyd Bridges show, which is not that well known, but I know it was kind of a big deal for you.
That's a whole different story, a story of a very different nature. Lloyd Bridges, Bud Bridges, wonderful actor, serious actor, had an anthology show of a different short story. It was a 30-minute show, different short story every week. I came in, I did one of the first shows, if not the first show, of that series. And I didn't know Lloyd Bridges until that show, but we just hit it off. It was just one of those things where we tuned into one another. And so he said, "Well, we make a deal. I got to have this guy. I got to have every other show. I want this Jeff Hayden on this show." Well, I would do a day's work with Bud Bridges, Lloyd Bridges. He'd say at the end of the day, "Jeff, if you have a couple of minutes, would you come into the dressing room, my dressing room? Let's look at tomorrow's pages." And I'd go into that dressing room, and I'd be in that dressing room till 11 o'clock at night, 12 o'clock at night, with Bud and I rewriting the pages that we had been given. So I would go home very, very late. Then I'd have to lay out my shots for the next day's work, preparing very carefully, which I always did. And I'd get to bed at 1, 2 in the morning, have to get up at 5, 6 o'clock to be on the set at 7, 7:30. And I'd come in and we'd shoot all day. And Bud would say, "Jeff, you have a couple of minutes before you go home. Let's look at tomorrow's pages." And this went on for an entire season. And I want to tell you, as exciting as the work was, the number of hours that went into those shows was just, I can't even describe it. As I think of it, I don't believe it, what we went through, because he wanted it to be the best it could be. That was the kind of actor he was, and the kind of discipline he had. He never settled for anything less than what could be the very best. And Aaron Spelling, who was the producer of that show, was a terrific writer. and a terrific producer, but Lloyd Bridges just wanted it the way he had to have it for himself. And I respected that and appreciated that. So it was a wonderful experience, but I must say that it was the toughest show I've ever done. As a matter of fact, a little side story or a footnote to that is I went to have my annual physical checkup with my family doctor, and everything checked out fine, even though I was exhausted. He then said to me, by the way, and this was back, I don't know what the dates are, but
62.
okay, back in the early 60s, he said, Jeff, by the way, I just read an article in the American Medical Association magazine that smoking could be cancer causing. And I had smoked. I reached into my pocket and I threw down that pack of cigarettes in his trash can, and that was the last cigarette I ever had in my life. But I was doing the Lloyd Bridges show, which was the toughest show, production-wise and hourly-wise, I'd ever done. And so I gave up smoking at the worst possible time when I needed all the help I could get. And I remember my wife reminding me that one night I said, oh, I can feel the nicotine leaving my feet. It's just leaving my body. Oh, what can I do? I have to go to work in an hour or two, and I can't have a cigarette. But I quit and got through it. And I think the reason I was able to quit is it was so tough on all other levels, as much excitement as we had making those shows, but it was so tough that I thought, well, like Job, I can deal with this quit smoking business as well. And that got me through it.
You mentioned Aaron Spelling. Did you
Yes.
get to know him well? What was he like?
Very well. Oh, very, very well. I first met Aaron on a Dick Powell theater that he called me in to do. It was based on, I think it was an F. Scott Fitzgerald story, major American writer's story with a very good cast. And so that's when I met Aaron on that show, and we just hit it off. We became very good personal friends as well as working together. He was married to Carolyn Jones, a wonderful actress whom I adored, and so we kind of spent time with Aaron and Carolyn. And then he did Burke's Law. And so I did a lot of Burke's Laws with Gene Barry. And that was fun because, you know, they had a deal with the Morris agency that they would get these stars from the William Morris office to work one day. Each of the stars, 3 or 4 every week. And so you met all these, you know, major Hollywood stars who would do one day's work on Burke's Law for $1,000. That was the deal. And so, you know, in 1 or 2 seasons, however long I was there, I met, you know, you couldn't think of a name in Hollywood that I didn't work with for one day. So it was fun.
I know some of those Burke's Law people you worked with. Mary Astor,
Yes, I did. Terrific lady, yes.
Zsa Zsa Gabor was on one of yours.
Fun lady.
Um,
And that was every day you had somebody like that, you know. And Gene Barry was a hoot. I mean, he was, you know, fun guy, talented guy, knew what he was doing.
I mean, could you tell that Aaron Spelling was going to become the big deal, the big Schlockmeister in TV that he...
Yeah, I think I knew. You know, he was so clever. He could turn a phrase. He could fix a scene. He could, if you had any problems with an actor, he could deal with it so smoothly, so beautifully. He was an amazing guy.
what was special about Route 66?
I loved going on location like that because I would get on a plane, fly. I did a couple of shows in the South. I'd get off the plane. Somebody would meet me from the production office, and I would say, look, don't take me to the motel. Take me to the closest community theater or regional theater or high school theater or college theater. Just bring me to a theater so I can see actors. And that would be, I would do that the first night I was there, second night I was there, and that's how I would cast the show outside of the principals. And so I loved it. You know, I got to see all these local theaters, and I got to find the best actors in that section of the country. And everything was shot on location, so that was very exciting for me.
Right, that was one of the only shows that was shot outside of Hollywood.
That's right, that's right. And Sterling Silliphant was, as I recall, Sterling was the writer. The first time I ever heard the word Vietnam was in a script on that show that Sterling wrote about American monitors or whatever it was, American instructors, you know, a few American soldiers in Vietnam. And it was just, it was wonderful to be out on location. Wonderful.
Then around that time you did Peyton Place for a while.
That's probably the one of the main and biggest shows I think that I ever did, because I did a whole year. That was every week. I did an episode a week for about 50 weeks. And, you know, the best young actors, the best elderly actors, the best middle-aged actors, the best scripts money could buy. I mean, those scripts supervised by Paul Monash with his coterie of major, major writers, with these wonderful actors in these very involving family stories. It was just like, how can I describe it? It's like eating peanuts. I never wanted to stop, you know. And I did most of the segments I did were with the younger people, you know, with Mia Farrow and Ryan O'Neal, and there were several other younger people, plus their interaction and relationships with the older people. But essentially, I did a lot of those intimate stories with the younger people. And it was Mecca for me as a director. It was wonderful.
Well, what do you remember about the two sort of breakout stars from that show? Ryan O'Neal was one.
Wonderful. We had a terrific relationship, he and I. He worked hard. He really worked hard, cared about the character. And we had a lot of fun. He had a motorcycle. I'd never ridden on a motorcycle. That was my first experience. He put me on this bike. No, Jeff, you can do it. You can do it. No, Ryan, you're crazy. We're making a show here. What do you? No, you gotta. And it was that kind of relationship. And Mia was lovely. You know, very young, very malleable, very. How can I say? Very eager to make it, as it were. And I can tell you one story about my experience with Mia. She, at a certain point, was going out with Frank Sinatra. And I knew Frank Sinatra, and I'd met him a few times, and I said, she came to me one day, said, "Oh, Jeff, I'm so excited. I'm going to go out with Frank tonight." This was early in the relationship. "And we're going to go here and there." I said, "Mia, you're in the first shot tomorrow morning. And I know Sinatra, he's going to keep you out, if he can, till 3 o'clock in the morning with his, you know, date at the club, and he's going to be singing, and he's going to go out with his buddies, and you're going to go with him, and it'll be 4 in the morning. And Mia, you're in the first shot tomorrow morning. Please, you got to be here on time. We got to go. It's a big day's work ahead of us, and I want to see you not bleary-eyed first thing in the morning, first shot." "Okay, Jeff, don't worry. Next morning, 7 o'clock, 7:30, no Mia. 8 o'clock, no Mia. I start shooting inserts, keeping the crew busy. 9 o'clock, she's not there. She walks in 10 o'clock. I said, "Mia, do you realize you know, I'm shooting inserts so they don't bother me from the front office. But we have, you know, whatever it was, 10 pages to do today. It's 10 o'clock. Get to that makeup table. Stop this little girl stuff. You're an actress. You're a mature person. You've got a crew of 75 people waiting to shoot your scenes." She left. She walked over to the makeup table. I'm now setting up the camera for her first shot. She came back a minute and a half later. She walked over to me, held up her hand, full of the hair from the back of her head, and she said, "Jeff, no more little girl stuff," and handed me all her hair. I said, Mia, we got to match your last scene from yesterday's shooting. What'll we do? Well, I don't know, she said. I just wanted you to know I'm growing up, no more little girl. I ran to the phone. I called Paul Monash, the producer, who was a wonderful writer. I said, Paul, tell me what to do. She cut all her hair. It's not going to match. What should we do? He said, get 2 flats and a bed. I'll be down in 10 minutes. I got 2 flats. This is Hollywood, I just said to the people, give me 2 flats and put a bed in front and wrap Mia's head in bandages, which is what he said to me to do. And he came down 10 or 15 minutes later with a couple of pages of Mia with, who's a wonderful actor now in New Orleans.
Ed Nelson.
Ed Nelson, wonderful. And she was in an auto accident, and she's now in the hospital. And I think it was Ed Nelson who has, the scene with her.
He was the doctor, yeah.
Okay, so that was it. Yeah, and so we shot it. Boom, boom, boom. And so she lay in that hospital bed for the next several weeks until they, squizzled the storyline around. But you see, first of all, it was a 20th Century Fox. I live in Westwood. I'd spent all my years going out to Warner Brothers, to Disney, to Universal, all those studios in the valley, on the freeway, taking an hour to get there in the morning, an hour to get home at night, or close to it. Here I was in Westwood, just driving to Fox, 10 minutes away. It was just, wonderful to work at that studio. And Everett Chambers, who was the producer under Paul Monash, was a terrific producer whom I'd known from New York days on the Philco Playhouse.
What did he do on Philco?
He was an assistant to Bill Nichols, who was the casting director, and Everett was his assistant. And so I'd worked with Everett in New York. And Everett was a very knowledgeable producer, very, very sharp, good guy. And you needed a waterfront. There it was in Westwood on the Fox lot. You got a waterfront. You needed a village under the snow in the middle of the winter in New England. You came to work the next day, and they had just taken the commissary and made it into a New England building, and the snow is falling, and everything is covered with snow. It was just, everything was right there on the Fox lot. And you came to work every week, shot your 30-minute segment every week. And people, were watching that show. It was a very hot show. And it was a wonderful experience. I alternated with Teddy Post and Walter Doniger, 2 of the finest directors I'd ever known, and had watched their work until I came on as the 3rd guy. And so there I was in this wonderful company. Wonderful.
Why did you leave after a year?
I had the contract for, I think, 50 shows, whatever it was, and I was offered, 50 shows of anything, no matter how wonderful. It's, that's it. It was it for me. I think the next thing I did maybe was a Batman or some wild comedy.
Well, I have to ask you about that. That was also at Fox. You did 1 2-part episode of Batman. What do you remember about that?
Just that it was crazy, fun script, wild script, and a lot of laughs. And the guy who was the main character was, a nice guy.
Adam West.
Yes, Adam. And we it was just fun. I don't remember where I went from Fox, but I know I just felt I'd had, after 50 episodes, that was enough for me.
Do you remember Morris Evans? He was the guest villain.
Yes, indeed. Wonderful, wonderful man and wonderful actor with wonderful stories from the theater. I sure do remember him.
I mean, Batman was so unique in terms of its tone and its look. Did you adapt to that?
Yeah, sure. How could you? That was the script, and these were the actors, and they knew what they were doing. They carried the show. Adam and the other guy with him,
Burt Ward.
Yeah.
So late in the '60s, you did The Bold Ones.
Yes, because Joel Rogerson, who had done 77 Sunset Strip, was the producer on the bold ones, the New Doctors, as I recall.
Well, first of all, can you describe that format? Because it was a little unusual, the
Yes.
umbrella. What
It
was
was,
that
you know,
about?
very, very unusual and very, I thought, interesting. They had 3 different series going under this umbrella: the New Doctors, the New Lawyers, and a new Senator. And each week you had a different one of those 3 episodes, and different casts, of course. And I got involved with the New Doctors, so I can't tell you. No, and then I did the New Lawyers for Roy Huggins. I never did get to the Senator. I think, wasn't Hal Holbrook yeah, I never got to Hal Holbrook, unfortunately. But I loved the bold ones because each segment of the bold New Doctors on the bold ones was about a new discovery in medicine, a new area, a new field of medicine, like the first kidney transplant ever was done on the bold ones as a drama, or the first development in blind people being able to see through something on their back with pinpricks or what have you that made an image. Anyway, each episode was about some new avenue, new discovery in medicine. And Joel Rogerson, who was the producer, would send me to the hospital where they were doing the work on that new field. So if it was San Francisco, they'd ship me to San Francisco, and I'd spend a week with the doctors on that particular part of whatever they were doing that became the script, as he would send the writers out. And so each show that I did was this wonderful, wonderful experience of being involved and watching the doctors who were developing these new facets in the world of medicine. And some of those shows were really powerful, powerful dramas. And the cast, of course, E.G. Marshall, whom I'd worked with in New York, whom I knew from New York, was just, the most terrific actor you could ever work with. And David Hartman was good, and John Saxon was so good. It was just exciting to be part of this revolution in medicine, So I did quite a number of those with Joel, who was this, as I say, great producer, and has had a great history, by the way, in television.
You told me something once about E.G. Marshall's technique. Do you remember that?
Indescribable. I don't know what I could have told you, except to say I would get a script. At night, I'd sit there preparing my shots for the next day, preparing the blocking for the next day, and I'd read a scene with E.G. Marshall, and I'd think to myself, I know they wrote this in a hurry. I know we're under pressure. I know this is maybe not the best writing in the world, but listen, we gotta get this show out. And I'd worry so about the nature of the writing of the scene with an actor like E.G. Marshall, with whom I'd worked in New York, I guess on Philco or some, good dramatic show, where we would take a rehearsal time and a lot of time to get the script where we wanted it. And here we're now dealing with, material coming out very fast. And I'd worry so, and I'd have a sleepless night. I'd get to the set the next day. E.G. would be there with the same pages that I had, and we'd rehearse the scene. And I'd think to myself, wait a minute. It's terrific. E.G. Marshall could read anything and make you not only believe it, but make you think, well, this is terrific. And that was my experience with him. No matter what you put in front of E.G., however fast it was written or what have you, he didn't change a word, just would do it. And it was totally not only believable, but just wonderful, wonderful. He's a very special actor, E.G., very special. I miss him.
The Lawyers episodes of The Bold Ones starred Burl Ives.
Yes. That was a kind of a thrill for me because I'd seen him play Big Daddy in the Tennessee Williams play Cat on the Hot Tin Roof, and was a big fan of his from all his years as the folk singer. So it was kind of a big step for me to work with Burl Ives. Lovely actor, lovely man. Again, prepared, disciplined, and he was surrounded by good actors on that show. And Roy Huggins was the producer, and what a writer he was.
Yes, tell me about Roy Huggins. How did he work as a producer?
Well, he just had the most clever mind. And the thing that fascinated me about Roy Huggins was he would have an idea for a show. He'd get into his car and turn on a tape recorder, and he would drive for miles and miles and miles and just dictate a story into that tape recorder. And he'd come home, he'd take the tape recorder, give it to his secretary, and there was the script. I mean, it was just mind-boggling. He had this creative energy that he could deal with it even just driving his car. That's what he liked to do. And his scripts were like the most wonderful puzzle, you know, that could be put together. But every piece fit with Roy Huggins. That was somehow, to me, the beauty of those scripts. And I think from there I went on to Alias Smith and Jones, which was another one. You can tell I had a nice life in television because I loved doing the Westerns. I had done one or two or three, I think, before that at Universal, one-shots. But here was this whole series. And Pete Toole and I, again, had a great rapport. And somehow we just hit it off together.
Well, can you back up a little? What was
Sure.
Alias Smith and Jones about? What was the
It's
story?
a premise of two not such great guys barnstorming around the West, solving crimes. And there were two, how can I say, screw-ups. Two guys that were not necessarily the smartest detectives or the best, you know, cowboys or what have you. And they just always got involved and embroiled in the different problems. But how can I say? I grew up in the Bronx in New York City. It's true I did go to school in a rural town in North Carolina, but there was something about shooting Westerns that always thrilled me. I loved the stories. I loved the horses. I loved the furniture and all our sets because they were wonderful period pieces from, you know, America in the last century or now the century before. And there was just something about the ambiance of the Western, costumes, the whole sense of going back in our history. And Roy Huggins and those wonderful scripts. So I just enjoyed that show. It was a tough show to do. Physically, it was a tough show to do. We would shoot in the summer in the valley in temperatures literally at 110, 115 degrees, without exaggerating. And you had to just keep shooting. We had to make the days work. Or there was a lot of night stuff. And just on the opposite end of the pole, the winters in the valley, shooting at night, were the coldest I have ever been in my life. But we kept shooting, you know.
Well, those shows you did with Roy Huggins were at Universal. Was there
Yes.
something particular about the production department at Universal about how they...
Yeah, they were tough. You had to deliver. You had to get those pages in on time. No, what happens is, as a director, you get going on a series, and it's at Universal. So, you know, the different shows on the lot, hear that you're doing this show, or you meet them in the commissary, or the production department guys talk amongst themselves. You know, this guy Hayden, he can do it in 6 days. He's pretty reliable. And so people on the lot say, oh, well, let's see if we can get him, you know, for a couple of shows over here. And so you just keep going. It's cyclical, you know. Like in the beginning when I started, I was at Screen Gems almost all the time down at Columbia, doing those comedies, you know, one after the other. Once you get in a groove, so to say, you kind of keep going, or at least I did. And that's what happened to me out at Universal. But again, I'm living in Westwood, having to travel over the mountain on the freeway to get to Universal. So when Peyton Place came along, 10 minutes away, you can see right there how exciting that was for me.
But what would happen to you if something went wrong and you couldn't get it done in the 6 days?
It was not so good. You know, if you had to go over, you went over, and you heard about it, you know. There were times I'd be called in at the tower at Universal and told, you went over. What's the matter with you? Do you want to work at this lot? How could you do such a thing? And I try to say, well, wait a minute. You know, I did the best I could do, and the producer said, if you got to go an extra half day, go an extra half day. Call the producer. Why are you asking me? I'm doing what they want me to do. That kind of thing. But I always managed to survive. Didn't happen too often, thank goodness.
You mentioned you had a rapport with Pete Duell, the star of Alias
I
from Jones.
did.
Can you describe that?
Well, there was just something about his personality, his inquisitiveness. He was a very sort of inquisitive guy. Just an introverted, interesting guy who developed this persona as an actor, you know, that was much bigger personality-wise than Pete himself was. He just had interests, you know. He would develop interests. He was literate. He would read. We would discuss books. We would discuss politics. We would discuss the world in between takes. You know, he was just someone that I found very interesting, and communicative on a quiet level, as opposed to the character he played. And I knew he had certain problems, and he knew that I knew, I think, and I watched him fighting against the problems, you know, and would accommodate him as much as I could to help him in terms of the schedule, one thing and another. And then when he took his life, which was just a crazy accident, you know, how he took a 6-shooter with the 6 things and spun the thing and did the Russian roulette and hit the one bullet that was put in the chambers. I was really devastated for him. I was just devastated, and asked to, you know, I just couldn't. I went on. I think I did one more episode or something, and I just couldn't go on.
How did the show recover from having its star pass away?
I don't know that it ever did. I think it remained on with another actor for a while, but I don't think it survived beyond that season. I don't really remember, but I know I just had to go.
What did you like about Mannix?
Roberts and Goff were the 2 writers, Ben Roberts and Ivan Goff. Ivan was an Englishman, a very elegant guy, wrote some terrific movies, and Ben Roberts was just a lovely, beautiful man, wonderful painter, great artist, as well as a funny and good writer. And the lead in Mannix was
Mike Connors?
Mike Connors, another nice, really nice, hard-working guy. And those scripts were so good. I mean, Goff and Roberts just were magical how they could turn out those scripts, and they did them. You know, they didn't have a whole series of writers around them. They wrote those scripts every week. If they had some help, it was mainly, though, their work. And sort of like Roy Huggins, you know, everything in those scripts worked. They all fit. You didn't have, you know, any major discrepancies story-wise, as I discovered as I did other shows and other series later. Those scripts were of a piece, you know. You could start in the beginning, go right through to the end, and know you were on solid ground all the way through. And Connors was good. And the cameraman on that show, who was from the Donna Reed show, was also wonderful. And I'm sorry his name escapes me, but he was an integral part of that series and a pleasure to work with, as he was on Donna Reed. And it was kind of fun for us. He'd been doing comedies years before I'd been doing comedy. He was now doing the big crime shows. I was now doing the bigger shows. So It was a good experience.
Then you did some episodes of another kind of detective show, Ironside. What were the challenges involved in that?
Many, many. First, Ray Burr, very talented, good actor. Boy, and there's a man who knew story-wise, script-wise. He knew what he could do and what would work on that show. Like no, I mean, he had a great story mind, Ray Burr. Joel Rogerson, whom I mentioned earlier, was producing that show. And it was a good show to do, mainly because Joel was so good delivering good scripts. Ray Burr was so good in delivering on the set. But Ray Burr, as you know, was in a wheelchair, and he would not go on location. That was in his contract. Now, that show shot for 6 days, as did all the hour dramas. 4 days in the studio with Ray, and 2 days on every script were on location. And Ray would not go on location. I mean, that was his deal with the studio. So we had a stand-in for him, or for his back. And we would go out 2 days on every show to a location and shoot plates. And we would bring the plates with Ray stand-in and other actors in front of the plates of the location. Or I would shoot on the location with the other actors. But any scene that Ray was in, it had to be against the plate. Then we would come back to the studio for the next go-round, and we would shoot Ray's close-ups in the studio to cut in with the plates behind. No easy task. It just took a lot of figuring, a lot of minutia to get all the pieces right to make those scenes come together. In addition to which, Ray had it in his contract. He didn't want to have to learn all those lines every night. So he had 3 teleprompters on the set arranged beside the camera, depending upon what the setup was. And he was an absolute master at reading the teleprompter and dealing with the actors with whom he played in the scenes. But every setup we did with the camera had to accommodate the teleprompters. So every move we made, and you know, when you're doing television, film television for an hour show, you can do 20, 30 setups a day, easily. So every one of those setups had to be designed not only for the camera and all the lights, but for those teleprompters. So it was not easy, but it worked. You know, you adjust, and Ray was just absolutely terrific. You know, you'd never know he was not on location. You would never know he was using a teleprompter. And if that script wasn't absolutely what it should have been, Ray was in his dressing room getting it right. You know, he had a great story mind. So it worked.
Did you work with any other TV stars who made demands as large as that, as vast as that?
Well, I'll not mention names, but I'll just say I've done westerns where the leading man would come back from lunch, and I'd have to stand him next to his horse, or he couldn't stand up. And that presented problems. You know, how do you continue with the script and the story when your star can't move from next to his horse, or he'd fall down?
Because his lunch had been
A
liquid?
couple of martinis or whatever. I worked with an actress on a sitcom. Wonderful actress. Absolutely one of the best I've ever worked with. After lunch, she had to be seated at a table or in a chair or on a sofa. She couldn't literally stand up after lunch, but she knew her lines.
Also in the 70s, you directed for Quincy M.E.
Klugman. Good scripts, you know, again, meaningful stories. You know, everything Jack Klugman did on that series had some substance. You know, it was about something, and he loved that, and I loved that.
What kind of stories? Can you say what what that
Well,
substance was?
well, let's say we did a show on Tourette syndrome, okay? Like somebody, some parent had a son with Tourette syndrome, and it was involved in some crime of some kind. But the whole show basically was an exposure of that particular problem or that disease of Tourette syndrome. And it was such a powerful show and such a good script that Klugman took that episode to Washington, screened it for a committee in Congress, and he got that very important orphan drug law that was passed, that they finally had the pharmaceutical companies investing millions of dollars in these strange diseases that they otherwise wouldn't invest any money in because there was not enough sales at the other end. And, just think you've done a television show that when played in Congress to a committee, got the whole Congress to vote in these millions of dollars for an investment in research in the world of drugs. I mean, that's one show comes to my mind. Another show we did was about a football stadium, or we use the stadium downtown where USC plays, and the pipes were old, and there was some guy who died, and they didn't know from what, and it turned out he died because he had been drinking at a water fountain in that stadium. And to this day, my wife will never drink at a water fountain at a stadium or a big public place because of that show that Jack did about whatever that thing was in the pipes, that they hadn't caught on to. But every single episode was about something. I can't remember all that I did, but they were all meaningful.
Were you working with actual Tourette sufferers in that one show?
Oh, that's a tough story. Jack, who was very, very smart actor, very smart producer, and great in casting, too, because he knew a lot of people and was so good himself. So he had a cousin or a nephew who knew somebody with Tourette syndrome, which is what led to the development of that script. And then Jack said, well, we got to use that kid. I said, wait a minute, Jack. This kid, in the script, is on every page. He's got all these huge scenes with his father and with you and so forth. And you're asking a young man in college somewhere who's never acted in his life, who has Tourette syndrome, to come here, and I got to shoot it in 6 days, and he's never seen a mark on the floor of the stage in his life. And he's got these huge scenes. He's got to be crying. He's got to become hysterical. He's got to do this. Jack said, I believe we got to be authentic. And it'll never be as authentic as using the real person. I said, Jack, are you a doctor? Are you a whatever he was in the show? I forgot what you called it.
Medical examiner.
Medical examiner. Are you a pathologist? You're an actor. But we believe you, don't we, every week? And that's what finally, thank goodness, won a very painful, and I'm telling you this in a minute, right? This went on for a week. Then we did a show, I remember.
Can I interrupt you for a second
Sure.
before we do that? Because we need to change the tape.
Oh, okay. But let me come